we're about to jump into the Estuary Leadership Panel. This is something we've done at every Breakwater Festival, and it's really just designed to help give estuary leaders who are, trying to figure out how to do estuary in their local context, some way to figure out how to do that and problem solve those things. So what's going to happen today is I'm going to sort of start with introductions, but Gordon's actually going to be leading this, asking us some questions. He is from Germany. He's wanting to start an estuary in his local context, and so we're going to give him the best advice we have from the ways we've done community building. So first, let's do introductions. So Gordon, why don't you start, and then we'll go this way, and then I'll hand it over. I might ask you a couple questions of why you want to start estuary,
Sure.
and then I'll hand it over to you, and you can ask us whatever you like.
All right, so my name is Gordon. I'm originally from Macedonia, but I live in Germany. And so I've been attending these Breakwater festivals since the beginning. I've only missed one, but the first one when I joined, I didn't even know about Paul van der Klee, but I saw something about Bridges of Meaning Festival from Jonathan Pajot, like UNA, and I immediately knew. I didn't know what it was. I just heard Bridges of Meaning Festival. The words made sense. I was like, all right, whatever this is, I have to visit. And he said it was going to be in Europe, so I knew it was going to be in Germany. And so ever since I started attending, and one of the highlight for me every single time I go to these festivals is the estuary. And so it's something I've been meaning to try. I used to live somewhere in Dortmund, so that's about central West Germany, and then never really managed to kick it off, or kind of gave up on it myself personally, to be honest. And then I was hoping to, now I moved cities, now I'm in the south of Germany, and I'm hoping to basically find a community there and then start an estuary. There's one that's from a town that's about 2.5 hours away from me, but I'm hoping to find start something local, and then have, for two reasons. One of them is basically, I think it'd be interesting and very helpful for people there to basically have some opportunity to explore ideas in a quote-unquote more safe environment. So usually when people have disagreements, especially as of recently, it's becoming more and more polemic. And when you have something like an estuary group, one is that they get to have disagreements in a way that's useful for everybody. So they get to get different perspectives and then a whole outlook that they never had before. But then the second one is people get to talk, and then for the first time ever for many people, they get to be listened to. And that's usually very, very rare. And when people get listened to in a very modern context today, like usually what happens is people just kind of nod their heads and they're like, yes, thank you, and then they give some cheap advice and then that's it. But when you have something like an estuary environment, a lot of people tend to see, even when we have these conversations about intellectual topics or whatever it is, could be religion, could be faith, could be something about philosophy, could be something about events, people always talk about something that's in the back of their mind that has to do with their current life or their current situation, whatever it is. And so it's, for a lot of people, it's also helpful as almost like a place of healing. Maybe not so much in terms of spiritual healing or whatever. In some sense, I guess, yeah. But a place of healing where they can express their ideas and then figure out what it is that they actually even believe. It's very difficult to figure out what you believe in unless you have an opportunity to branch out your thoughts and then see where you have gaps or see what you thought was important but really wasn't important, something like that. And so I talked to Cassidy about this. She suggested I come here, ask questions. My questions are going to be very simple and very practical questions in terms of how to organize it. I think it's going to be very helpful for people if they had something like a guideline of very practical things of how to organize something, what to do, how to handle people, and that's what I want to explore.
Great, perfect introduction. So, Zero, why don't you start, give some background on your work with community building, community organization, and and then after we do those introductions, you can go straight into your questions, Gordon, and we'll try to give you the best advice we got.
Thank you. So yes, most of you had heard from me already this morning, so I won't go into the whole backstory, but for the purposes of this session, I've done a lot of different types of community building projects over the years. So the very first one in my teens was kind of building out these apostasy communities. But actually it started before then, because one of my journey out of faith involved actually long friendships with people who really disagreed with me on the other side. And I was very grateful for the people who strongly disagreed with me, but remained friends and remained in a place of sort of like love and understanding. So that was really valuable to me. So that was something I always wanted to do for myself and for other people. And then I spent about 6 or 7 years building apostasy communities. And then I started noticing online that people were saying in the political space, oh, I can't talk about this. Oh, I've been fired from my job. But more about their political views or values or lifestyle choices, and some of that centered around especially women who had grown up in very liberal cultures, but then wanted at some point to have a much more kind of traditional marriage family life. So at the point when they wanted to have children, and this was around Louise Perry's Discord, Maiden Mother Matriarch. So I started noticing people saying, I feel so alone. And I used to reply on the comments being like, you can meet each other and you can support each other. And to me that was really normal because I'd already done this with the sort of apostasy groups. But people reacted like this had never been proposed to them before. So I hadn't realized that people found this kind of quite hard to do. So then I started organizing lots of different sort of support groups, which was very strange because I'm not a mother, and I was like leading these meetup groups for people who were kind of thinking about or becoming mothers. And that's where I met Cassidy. So I actually am also one of these people who started coming to Estuary without actually having heard about Paul van der Klee. And it's only after I got in touch with Cassidy that I saw that there was this whole background. And just to let you know, on the other side of this, I mentioned I do some free speech work, and I do support people's legal right to speech. So that's part of my caseload. And I support their right to speak in very fiery and polemical ways. But personally, I don't necessarily find that helpful. So I've been looking for ways to have those same conversations in a kind of different context. And someone I'm really inspired by is Daryl Davis, who is the black jazz musician who built these like friendships with KKK members and ended up kind of de-radicalizing a lot of them. I'm not saying that's the model for everyone. It's just something I personally find very powerful. So I've been trying to explore how to do that. And so when me and Cassidy met, it was great to use Estuary as a way to start doing this. Luckily, I finished, so thank you for the mic. So, over to you.
What do you want me to talk about?
Who are you? What's your relationship to Estuary?
My name is Paul van der Klee. I, myself and John Van Donk started Estuary sort of as the Jordan Peterson moment was losing steam, and we wanted very open groups where people could come and talk about anything and have a sense of community, whether or not they had a religious background. As I mentioned earlier today, I saw the need of this for churches, because while churches have a lot of small group experience, often in Bible study contexts, there are topics that church people won't bring up. And as a pastor, sometimes what happens is something is festering in someone's life. They don't want to talk about it, then they disappear. And once they've disappeared, you can sort of track them down and say, where are you? What happened? And then you hear something that you knew nothing about for a couple of years. And not saying that definitely early intervention could have helped, but it might have, but you never got the chance just by the nature of the community itself. They don't want to talk about it. And what I've seen is that in a context where it isn't just church people, lots of different things get raised and a lot of good things happen. And so there's a program called ElseNet that if you go to estuaryhub.com, you can sign up for ElseNet, and that is used to help train estuary leaders. So if you want to be an estuary leader or you want to start a group, very much go to ElseNet. I was just in Austin, Texas, where they have an estuary group that's growing very quickly. And when I went down there, we had 50 people show up, and we were going to do estuary, so we broke up into 4 different groups. And afterwards, I discovered that none of the people had any training from ElseNet. And some of those people were only doing estuary by reading the protocol from a sheet. And John Van Donk was horrified when I told him. But that's really helpful, because all ElseNet does is gives people, we're just basically running these estuaries in Zoom meetings, and you can get practice of small group dynamics. In churches, a lot of people, if they've run Bible studies, they kind of know how to do a small group, but this will give people that opportunity and chance to learn if they haven't. So, and I've usually, if I can, if someone says, I want to start a new estuary group, if I can show up, I can usually draw more people sort of out of the woodwork, like what happened in Austin. So they usually had between 10 and 15 people show up once a month for their group. And then because I came, we had 50 people show up, so not all of them will keep showing up for every month, but that'll just help get their group going further. So.
Great. My name's Cassidy. I am a filmmaker by trade, but the last couple years I have been running different estuary events across Europe to help support the local groups, and have worked with several estuary leaders trying to understand what they're doing to build estuary in their communities so that I can help more people. I found estuary through Paul. Before estuary was even a thing, I was linked to his YouTube channel by a friend as I was trying to struggle my way through evangelical culture after going through a period of deconstruction. And yeah, I just always found the approach that he had helpful. And when I was in evangelical, I always wondered, why can't we have a space where we can come together and just talk to people without any sort of mission of conversion, just like really hear each other out and think through these ideas. And I was often told that's a really nice thing, but we don't want to muddy the truth. And while I respected that position to a point, there was something about it that never felt quite right. So to see someone who was a pastor, who was inviting sort of questions and dialogue outside of that was very interesting to me. And so when he came up with this idea of estuary, to have a neutral space that was church adjacent to just come and have conversation, I was completely sold in. And so I've been just trying to help grow the movement sustainably ever since. So yeah, I hope that, and me and Gordon have already had some talks about this, but I just hope to be able to continue helping people leverage the knowledge that I've gotten from other people to start more estuaries.
My name's Tayo. I've been following Paul for 2 or 3 years plus, and I got into the estuary thing because that sounded like the most interesting projects that Paul was working on at the time. There were already people on his from his online YouTube community that were having very interesting conversation that, like Cassidy said, weren't suitable for Bible study, to put it that way. And I thought that was very interesting. Plus the pitch of salt water meeting fresh water and having conversation across dividing lines was very, very interesting. So I'm one of the people that took the PVK and Cassidy's help to try to start a few estuaries, and the London one's still going even without me being involved at all. So a few success stories along the way and a few not so successful stories as well.
Okay, Gordon, go ahead. Hit us with your hard-hitting questions.
All right, so I'm trying to think about it practically. Let's say I'm trying to start an estuary, and the first thing that comes to mind is, how do I find a place? So location is one of those things. I'd imagine, like, I've talked to other people before, just friends in general, and they would suggest something like, oh, you can just go to a cafe or something. And it's like, based on the conversations we're having, no, absolutely. We can't have other people listen to this. Especially if people want to have this feeling of like freedom to express themselves, like with very either it's not just controversial opinions, but just weird opinions, unformed opinions, just this struggle. And so, in terms of finding a place, what would be the best go-to, maybe, or some advice you could give?
I've found churches to be ideal. If you're a member of a church, see if you can get permission to use, because churches often have rooms available during the week for free. Not everybody has that available. I've seen people do it in restaurants and coffee shops. Sometimes libraries will have community space. Any place that sort of has a community open space. It's good to have a quiet space so you can hear each other. One of the main things about having a group is that The schedule needs to be predictable, the place needs to be consistent, and you need to be consistent with both. One of the surest ways to kill a group is if people can't find you or they go to the normally scheduled time and place and you're not there. They only need to have that happen once and they won't come back. So even, now I've finally gotten churches know this in terms of their worship services. 11 o'clock, this place, every week, doesn't matter, always happening. Churches have learned that for centuries. And I had to convince my Estuary group at church that when I'm in Europe, you still do it. And so I've finally gotten that through their heads. But it has to be consistent place, consistent time. More reps, in my opinion, is best. I like every week, but very few people can sustain that.
Yeah, I think location is the hardest problem to solve, particularly in cities, big cities. The three most successful places that I've seen estuaries start are churches, community centers, or personal homes. And all three have trade-offs. Like, for example, a personal home, it's very private, but depending on how much space you have, they're hard to grow. And then if the estuary leader is the person who lives in the house, there's a certain power dynamic that creates some complications, and so you kind of have to figure out how to manage that. But I think if you can find a way to leverage to get started and have a commitment of that place for a certain amount of time, you can learn, you can keep growing and learn what is going to make the most sense for the group that you have. But I do think that there is some sort of importance of a sense of privacy. And this is where you can do it in a cafe and a restaurant, like the German estuary in Mannheim. They started in a cafe, but it was 2 of them, and then when it got to 4, it was still okay, but then you get to 6, and it's hard to hear, and they very quickly learned, okay, we're going to have to find that private space. So they've been running theirs in a community center that they have a personal relationship with for a long time. So if you can leverage personal relationships to find a space, it's going to make it easier than trying to go from nothing. I mean, Teo, what's your experience? You've had a lot of struggles with this because you've done it on the ground, huh?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Space is the hardest part of the equation to try to solve, which is why I wouldn't start with trying to solve that one first, because trying to find a consistent space, you kind of have to grow into that, in my experience. And I'm saying the most successful estuaries that I had were the ones that, when I was living in Manchester proper, my church I was in good standing with my church so much that they were allowing me to have the keys to the church for the days that I needed for. So that's the most ideal. I've not had the experience of having estuaries in people's home, but well, actually that's not true. Yeah, well, we had a few. We've experimented quite a lot with spaces, because spaces is the hardest problem to solve. I think I'm not as much anti having it in a cafe as a lot of people, because when you're starting, you're not starting with a group of 8, 7 people. And if we just got 4 people at a cafe, you can have a good estuary, because the sort of noise is not too loud that 4 people can't understand each other. And at the same time, you can get lost in the conversation that you forget that you're even in a cafe. So I've had that experience. But ideally, you do want somewhere quiet where, like you said, people can feel safe enough to be vulnerable and personal.
We're in England and no one has yet mentioned the pub, so I'm going to, so just from a different angle, when I did the apostasy communities, obviously privacy was also a life and death issue, so this is something we took really seriously, but we actually did manage to find that there are a lot of pubs where you can book out spaces. I have found that this has changed since COVID, unfortunately. When I first started doing it, you used to be able to kind of rent for not very much, or even just like a minimum spend, which you would meet if you kind of had enough drinks. I think the prices have got more expensive now. I agree that having it in someone's private space would be lovely, but in London, like, my private space is like a sofa, and I can barely fit myself in there, so that's really hard. But I've been trying to kind of various other things also use church halls that have been mentioned. And you know, one of the problems I've been finding is there are some spaces I could use regularly, like a pub or a community centre or in a church. They do require donations. So what I've been thinking about is how do other groups do it, like Alcoholics Anonymous or you know these sorts of groups where they need privacy. And I think that they rely on donations from their members just to at least, so it's free, but if people can afford it, they donate so that we can afford to rent these spaces. And I don't know if that's something that is done in Estuary, but it's something I've been asking whether it's like one of the possible solutions. That or what, again, in the apostasy community, what people did is people who had kind of bigger houses, not me, you know, were very generous sometimes in opening out their homes to people once a certain level of trust obviously has been built up. So if it's like a regular group that, and you know every single person, that can be helpful. I know some very brave people who open their home to everyone, but that's also on their risk because you're getting people from the public. It's personally not something I would be comfortable doing even if I had the space, but you know, hey, there's all sorts of people, so some people do that. So yeah, those are sort of the broad range of things I've tried over the years.
Okay, so that kind of eases us into the next topic, which is about finding people. But it's kind of like a two-part question: how to find people in terms of how to advertise it, but then how to, just from practical standpoint, how to deal with people who don't necessarily fit in or are just making things worse. I don't know how else to say it, but to be more direct about it. But it's like how to handle difficult people. I guess a lot of it is just diplomatic speech and whatnot, but part of it is also about maybe marketing it in a way where you attract a certain kind of group of people who are already interested maybe in having an open conversation, or at least open to trying it.
So for me, estuary is a practice. It takes a lot of repeated reps to get really good at it. And the more that you practice at it, I think the better you get at handling difficult people. But the question there, when you're starting, how do you get that practice and how do you do it in a way that's healthy? I always say start with who you know. Find at least one friend who you really like talking to, you have interest, who might even have an interest in the same things that you do, and say, hey, I'm trying to start this thing. And if you can have at least one person who's kind of committed to trying this thing and building this thing, it becomes easier as you grow. And then from there, you can invite friends. And I think when it comes to growing, stay small for a while. You can have the same sort of repeated conversations with 4 to 6 people, and you each getting more used to that practice. And as you're doing that, it opens the door to understanding what for our group is the best way to start to expand this out and let new people in. And yeah, but I mean, Paul, you probably have a lot of practice in this being a pastor.
Yeah, I think ElseNet is helpful there too, because everybody who starts a group has difficulty with a few people, talk too much. And there are little tricks that you learn with practice, how to sort of interrupt someone or settle them down, bring out some of the quieter voices. A lot of that is just experience in small group dynamics. And also use ElseNet and the internet to see if there are any other people close in your region who might be interested in this. ElseNet will help with some of that too. They're trying to get those tools better for that. But I remember in President Foxman in the TLC, Noah started a group in Washington State, and I was going up there for another reason, so I joined them. And there was one member of that group that he was difficult, and apparently he's still in it. So some of those people really can be difficult, but find a way and build a relationship, and then once you've got enough of a relationship with this person, then you can perhaps talk to them and say, you know, I'd really appreciate you letting more people in the group share some of their stuff. So that's just a lot of human relationships.
Yeah, ideally you would like to have someone that's familiar with what Estuary is to start with. That usually would be best. But given you said the nearest one to you was 2 hours away, you might have to go
Yeah.
solo. And in that case, I'm still with Van Dunk. That meetup.com still works as a tool to try to invite people. And I literally just copied Van Dunk's advert, which does sort of tailor, explains clearly what the sorts of conversations you're likely to have. As it relates to how to deal with difficult people, you just deal with them because they will show up. Estuary is open, and therefore you're going to have people wandering in that aren't going to be ideal for group conversation. And as a leader, like Cassidy and Paul both said, it's only over. I mean, you are going to have estuaries where someone's going to just dominate, and you might think, oh, I didn't do that well, but the more that happens, the better you'll be at dealing with it.
Yeah, just to add to that, so yeah, I've had this a couple of times in various different groups. What I always try to do, and appreciate it might not be possible in the beginning, is I always try to know who in the room is the best at dealing with confrontation. So just last night, I asked Paul, actually, if really weird people show up at the church, can you deal with them, please? It's helpful. It's helpful to know who is good at that sort of thing. And yeah, I'm 4'10". If it's someone really confrontational, I'm not going to deal with it. but if it's someone who's more just sort of talking for a long time or domineering, where I'm not worried about some kind of threat, then I think these are the sorts of things that you can learn. And yeah, when you first start out, you might not know who is good at what, but I think people kind of naturally come to know their roles quite well. And then in terms of how you find people, I in various different contexts, so in Apostasy, in the Louise Perry group, and for Estuaries, I've used a mix of like Meetup. I felt really old when I suggested Meetup. Meetup is what we used to use, and Reddit for these Apostasy communities. And then I suggested it when we were starting the MMM group, and people looked at me like I had 20 heads, and they were like, what is Meetup? We use Discord. So I've had to learn how to use Discord. So there will be different platforms, and it might be one that you don't know about yet. That's what I had to do with Discord.
Yeah, fair enough. So, kind of somewhat in line with this conversation. So, because Estuary is kind of like an open space for open ideas, in some sense, those open ideas can also, how would I say it? They can also push the Estuary whole protocol into a certain direction, or at least, I mean, just the gathering itself. And so, how would you know that your Estuary group, let's say, it's healthy at that moment, and how do you know that it's deviating from its original purpose? So in terms of like how you have the conversations, what the conversations are about, what the dynamics are about, if that makes sense.
In my experience, the truest sense that the estuary is going well is when people begin to regularly share personal pitches. Generally speaking, people will start up here, some idea, some agenda that they have. That's safe. But when in a healthy estuary, someone will dare to put forward a personal pitch that has a little bit of vulnerability, and if the group sees that they are handling that well, then your meeting is healthy. If your meeting becomes part of the reason we changed from the Jordan Peterson meetups to the estuary is that in time, a lot of the Jordan Peterson stuff just became grievance oriented. People were there to complain about their jobs, complain about their work, complain about politics. It just makes for a very negative group. And what happens, and the protocol helps you with this, is that people will get tired of those kinds of topics. And if someone says, this happened in my life and I don't know what to do, that tends to help the rest of the people set aside their politics and religion and begin to talk about, I have something like that. So when the group gets personal, it's getting more powerful, it's getting more honest, and usually that's a really healthy sign.
Well, this is a question, too, that I don't feel like I have the best answer for, because I recognize that estuary, in many ways, what you bring to it is what you get out of it. And so if you come with openness and curiosity and are really willing to listen to other people, it produces something really great. But it also has a potential, if you're bringing at it at a different spirit, it doesn't work as well. And so I wonder, is there some way to, like AA, develop more practices and guidelines to help support? I have no idea, but yeah, that's something I've been thinking about.
Do you want to answer that, or can
I think the protocol works really well. It's a combination of openness, but the group works when it becomes a high trust environment. In Austin, when I was talking to Rigel about some of this, he really helped me see it, that the reason Estuary works is because for it to be a satisfying conversation, it needs to be a high trust environment. And the group basically invites people to lend trust to it. And most of the time, it will be okay. And so I know over the years, a bunch of people have like, well, we need to add this rule and that rule and this rule. I think generally speaking, just go with it plain, stick to it, and then put out fires when you need to, but don't complicate it with more rules.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question, because it's one that I think every estuary leader at some point will come to, because there are going to be some estuary meetings that are like, oh yeah, that went absolutely great, and feels like everyone else feels so enriched. And there'll be others where you're like, could have been better. And in those moments, it's easy to think maybe there's things are going off the rail. And to me, I think it depends on the leader, because different leaders they've got a better sense of what the estuary is supposed to be like. Might come to my estuary and feel like it's not great, and to us regulars, like, oh, this is exactly what it's supposed to be. So you will find what your estuary is as the regulars start filtering in, and that helps to shape the identity of the estuary. And the reason I think it's a good question is because the opposite of that question would be when the core estuary members feel threatened by a new member, and they view it as the estuary changing. But again, it's freshwater meeting saltwater. It's not going to be a whole bunch of people that come from the freshwater meeting together and keeping guard away from the saltwater. It's at estuary. You're going to have a mixture of your estuary will have a character based on the regulars that are coming, but I think the nature of it is that it's supposed to change and move. And as long as, like Paul said, people are still feeling comfortable enough to share personal conversations, and just showing up regularly will give you a good idea that this is a healthy estuary.
So if I can also, again, share some experience from other groups. As I said, I'm very new to Estuary itself, so I don't have that much experience to share from Estuary directly. But, this is something I thought about a lot during the apostasy building community kind of project. And as you can imagine, the apostasy groups were full of very, very opinionated people, often very... from different positions, some very traumatized and angry with the religion they left, some much more amenable, some who still call themselves things like cultural Muslims, a real variation. And our job was to try to hold all of those people together without sort of making any of them feel like they couldn't, speak their mind. The funny thing is, I actually did use some, like informally, I looked at how other groups did this, again, people who are often in vulnerable or very traumatized situations. And I didn't make it a formal rule, but I actually used a lot of AA guidelines in practice without making it a formal rule. And I don't know if anyone knows anything about them, but a lot of the rules in these kinds of recovery communities are all things like, even if you have a really strong opinion, make it about yourself. So no cross-talking, in terms of sometimes a lot of disagreement can be fine, but if someone's sharing something very personal, even if it's the complete opposite to what you think, don't interrupt them, let them speak, let them feel safe. And at least start with acknowledging what they've said, right? I hear you, even if I disagree with you. Know that you have understood what it is that they're saying and that you can repeat it back to them. And the kind of recovery guideline is speak about I and not about you should do this. It's like, this is what's been helpful to me. This is why I think this. And actually, I think that these are the same kinds of, I've done a bit of mediation before, and I think that actually these are the same kind of things they teach you in things like couples counseling and things like this. So my point is, this is a very human issue, and a lot of groups over the years have developed ways to deal with them. So I think even without making it a formal rule, maybe we can draw on the wisdom of these other groups. And without waffling on, I just want to end by saying at your point, Paul, that sometimes these things can spiral into a really negative space. So I also, again, experienced this with the apostasy group. Like there were, there's a larger group, and there's sort of people who kind of bond over, like these people like going to music concerts, and I don't know, these people like going to art galleries. So you have different friendship groups form. And there was one I became part of that was mostly women, and so especially women who have been reacting to years of wearing, I mentioned I wore like a full face veil, and a lot of women who have, for various reasons, found themselves sometimes in danger from their fathers or husbands or whatever it was. And I remember going to those events and coming home feeling worse about my life, just feeling like there was no hope. They were just in this doom spiral. And there is this thing about just being like, just constantly in someone's trauma and they can't see out of it, that kind of puts this whole bleak shadow onto everything. And when it starts to descend like that, I think sometimes you might not have a solution within the group itself. Like there's only so much you can ask any group to do. It's more about finding other places where they can get support if it is something that that is that kind of deep and traumatic, and that know that they're supported elsewhere. But yeah, I found that really tricky to navigate. I don't know if I have a firm solution. Depends on the group, the context.
Right, thank you. So I'll try and do like a recap of what I've heard so far, just to try and understand how I put this in practice. So a lot of it, I suppose, is about starting off small, being very comfortable with starting off small. In fact, even the question of space is not so important when the group is small. So we can have something like, let's say, go to a cafe or something, find like a quiet spot maybe on the corner or whatever it is, and then start something, and then have something that's regular in the same location, and then build off from there. In terms of like advertising and whatnot, I guess just online through Meetup. People in Germany still use Meetup, so that Discord channels, whatever it is, and then trying to get people. I guess a lot of the advertisement messages we can put out are we can find from the Estuary website, Estuary Hub, I suspect. And so a lot of it seems to be about that, and then slowly building up from there. And then if we're able to find like a free spot somewhere, some location, maybe in a church or community center, whatever it is, then we can relocate. And then I do think, my personal opinion is that I do like being able to organize something like this without having to rely on donations. That's just my personal opinion. And having a stable location with like a stable time does allow for growth, because otherwise if it's all over the place, it kind of stumbles growth, and then that makes it complicated for newcomers too. And then once that's sort of formed, the rest of it seems to be so what I'm hearing is there's almost like two aspects to this. On the one hand, Estuary helps people kind of get to the depths of their own souls, or whatever it is. And it starts off with like conversations that are kind of like almost distance from the person. So conversations about, let's say, intellectual topics, books they've read, political opinions, whatever, religious beliefs. But it's almost like kind of, I say distance from the person in the sense that they are abstract. And then the more the relationship builds, the more they get to the personal level. And so on the one hand, it's about reaching the depths of somebody's soul, or having the ability to, or and the space to explore it, something like that. And then the other one would be something like relationship building, is what I'm hearing. So a lot of it is like a space for people to, which kind of sounds funny almost, but it's also tragic at the same time. It's that people today are extremely lonely and very isolated from each other. I go to these events, just to add context, I go to these events where it's like a meetup for internationals. And you just go there, everybody there speaks English, and then you go there just to make friends. And the whole idea is you just show up, it's usually in a bar, you meet people and you can talk to whoever you want to, and then hopefully you make some friendships. And then what I've noticed is that a lot of Germans started showing up to those events as well. And a lot of people, what I hear constantly, is people tell me that they have no friends, or they're very lonely. They don't tell it directly, they're very awkward about it, obviously. And everybody feels like they're a loser, but then everybody's going through the same exact thing, which is kind of ridiculous that you have a whole group of people who feel extremely lonely and then they by themselves can't connect. And then when you have something like an estuary, it almost sounds like you have this opportunity. You connect with people not just by having something similar in common, but actually by both reaching into the depths of their souls and then trying to figure out what it is that makes them who they are, I suppose. But also like what they think is important and what is how they're struggling with the modern world as we have it today. So that's one thing, but on the other hand, I suppose there are limits to this in the sense that estuary cannot be a replacement for church or anything similar. And then it also cannot be a therapy session, I suppose, because then I'd imagine you'd come in trouble, not trouble, as in you'd have issues with people showing up and they have a specific problem, and then every single conversation is about them talking about that specific problem, and so it's not a replacement for therapy. That would be my recap so far.
The protocol will help you with the problems of someone needing it to be their therapy session, because they will pitch the same thing every week and it won't get voted on.
Well, and the beauty of the protocol too, it's like you can pitch on various levels. It can be on the intellectual side, but then it's the personal, and then it's the contextual, and then even in the estuarial, which I don't know how often people really pitch that, but you have the space to examine what you're doing and work through those things. And yeah, it's a collaborative conversation. So all of a sudden, it's not one person dictating what's going to happen. It's coming together and trying to learn how do we navigate this thing to build something together. That's really cool and empowering, and not how most conversations are run.
I think that also means that there's a shared responsibility. So like if you go to an estuary session and you do feel that it has gone too far in one direction, I think sometimes the temptation is to like leave, and that can be understandable, but also it's like actually if you stay and you say no in the pitch, I want to point to something else, that also changes the nature of what that estuary is. And so I think that we're all responsible for the formation of these groups, and the more people that feel responsible for kind of for keeping it in a healthy direction, the better. It is when everyone walks away that you do just let just one or two people completely dominate, and then you really are off track.
All right. I don't think I have anything else. So far, so good.
Okay. Great. Well, is there any sort of last thoughts that anybody has about estuary, these groups? Any questions that you guys have for the other panelists?
Well, not quite a question, but I do just want to say the main thing with starting an estuary is starting an estuary. Like anything, it's just doing it. And you're going to do it badly, you're going to do it great, but the more you do it, the better you get at doing it. So just do it.
Yeah, I guess a lot of it is just stop overthinking, just get to it, yeah.
Well,
Makes sense.
you find this true in anything. Like, the biggest barrier is the first step. And everything is hard until you do it. And then once you do it, you realize it wasn't as hard as you thought, but it was also harder than you thought in this weird way. So I think, yeah, just taking the steps to do it and just being patient with it. You have this like long-term frame of just keep taking the little steps to build something bigger. You'll get somewhere, you'll get somewhere, and it'll teach you something. And, my friend Valerie, she always talks about estuary as being a type of place to learn intellectual hospitality. And so I love estuary in a way where it's not me trying to come and promote my idea or make someone else think something differently. It's a place where I can come and I can change my own mind and I can think through things and I can learn how to be gracious to other people and yeah, the whole point of that responsibility of if you can take responsibility of how you act in the conversation and how you can be redeemed by your mistakes in these conversations, I think it can only lead to something good in the long term.
Can I ask you guys some questions that I've just been curious about?
Yeah.
Do you find the experience of Estuary in the groups has changed the way you have conversations outside of Estuary groups with people who maybe fundamentally disagree with you, or does it not carry much over into other areas of life?
Well, I'm a strange case because in some ways I was carrying around the spirit of Estuary before it was a thing. I worked in comedy spaces, being a conservative Christian, which is very much on the outside, and I would sit in bars, not looking to get into these conversations, but having people being drawn to me and being able to have these conversations, but going out and continuing to chase those things and have these conversations. I have seen it expand outside of my world where it doesn't have to be the Estuary protocol. I can bring that spirit into the different spaces and the different communities that I have. And me and my husband met through Estuary, but we both say, you know, I'm more involved in Estuary now than he is anymore. But yeah, we both say this practice of what we did of having these conversations online and talking to people who are very different than us. It changes how we interact with our neighbors. It changes how we interact with people in our church. And, you know, we both had our minds fundamentally changed by this process. And so, yeah, you just have kind of a gratitude and a respect for it that you can't quite shake. That's how I found. But has it changed me? I don't know. I just think I've always had that sort of personality that was kind of attuned to that Estuary spirit. But I do think it's, yeah, kind of highlighted that and shown me the importance of it. I don't know. What about you?
I think similarly, I was I had the estuary spirit inside of me, but it definitely has improved my ability, particularly in the. I thought I was always decent in one-on-one conversations, but in group settings, I think having so many estuary reps has made me better in being able to. There's a phrase used in estuary often, which is the spirit of the conversation. And the more I've been in estuaries, the more attuned I am to being able to pick up on the spirit of the conversation even outside of estuaries. So in that sense, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, from my experiences, the ones I've had, I haven't been to many. I've been to like maybe 3 or 4 in my life, but every single time they help me sort of figure out what parts of my ideas that I want to, let's say, talk about or whatever it is. Just in general, could be any ideas. How to figure out what is relevant to talk about and what isn't. So I guess it's in line with this, like following the spirit of the conversation. But it does help you figure out, like, in a group setting, it's almost like there's like a invisible voting process in some sense. I don't know how to describe it, but people are trying to figure out, like, because now in some sense, when you're having a one-on-one conversation with a person, you have your position. The person might have the same or the opposite. Let's say something like that. But in a group conversation, it's almost as if you're trying to figure out how the world works. And so now everybody's voting on what they think are the important ideas in general. And so, for sure, in that direction.
And just to add, the thing that I have seen come out of Estuary more than changing necessarily personalities, although I have seen that happen as well, it's just the relationships. Like, I've had so many conversations with people who've been to past events that we've done or who've done Estuary and said, I met this person there and now they're the godfather of my child. And it's these crazy little things where it's like, who thought coming together to try to have conversations about things we found important would lead to actual living life and solving this loneliness problem that we have. And for me, that is huge. And I've seen it in my life and others. And that's the biggest change I've seen with Estuary, I think.
So that's all been really interesting. That actually leads to a lot more questions. So a lot of you have said you already have this spirit of Estuary. So do you think that it, do you think it requires people who already have that spirit, or do you think people can kind of become? So that's one. And then the second is just, do you think, what are the limits? Because, if you stood, I mentioned Daryl Davis at the start. and this is something that I personally feel very, I have in my work, I've sat and shaken hands with people who literally do want me dead and have said so, from both sides, so from both Islamists and on the other side, like white nationalists. And I don't know that I can change their mind. I'm not trying to, but I don't know if that's, you know, this sort of like the extremity, what you can even do with that in an estuary space. Oh, if we're out of time, we can stop. Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious about those.
I mean, I don't think it's required. I mean, I've definitely seen people who've come in and had, sort of a more closed spirit, and then it took them a while to kind of figure out the way that estuary works, and seen them change and grow. And I mean, there's people are so peculiar. There's all these peculiarities, and I'm sure for some people, my sort of openness and uncertainty drives them crazy. But no, I don't think it's a requirement. But yeah, I do think that I've always said, out of everything that I've seen of people trying to have conversations, I've never seen anything work as good as estuary to actually get people to have these interesting conversations and keep the humanity in check. And yeah, I've just seen so many people totally transformed by just trying. Because that's the beauty of estuary. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying and learning how to do it better. And yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of in-person and online things where we've seen chaos happen, and yeah, it just creates this place where people kind of look to themselves and go, okay, well, what could I have done differently there, and how do we navigate those things? And yeah, it is just a simple frame that keeps keeps space for the complexity of human personalities.
It's very difficult, probably nearing impossible to change anyone's mind, and have them admit that their mind is changing the moment. That's almost never happens, particularly not in one conversation. But what does happen is someone changing their mind on them wants to change other people's mind in an estuary settings, because there is, I think, Golden touched on it. A lot of people that come to estuaries, they've got a lot of ideas and they want to share them. And part of that, some people might come into that with the intent to try to change other people's mind. That's where they're starting. And even when they don't, if they still keep coming back, that's a good sign. And even a better sign is when they start forming friendships with people whose mind they were trying to change at the start. And to me, that's sort of the success stories of estuary. It's not really the mind changing, it's the friendship across dividing lines.
Yeah, what I've also noticed is something like, where I think estuary might help, is that usually what really helps people change their mind is not so much having just an opposite agenda or opinion and then trying to show how your opinion actually makes more sense than theirs. What usually helps people change their mind is just listening to what they have to say and then doing it until they branch out the fullness of the argument, whatever it is. And what a lot of people, and usually you do that by just asking questions, specifically like what and how questions. Instead of why, instead of like yes or no questions, you want to ask like open-ended questions. So what made you say that? Or what made you believe this? Or how about this? Whatever it is. And then when people get to tend to, what ends up happening is after 2 or 3 questions like that, people open up and they start choosing their words, because they notice that you're actually listening to what they have to say, and they start choosing their words and they try building their arguments, and what they find out is that actually they don't even understood their argument as well as they thought they did, but now they get to. And a lot of people, which is something I think a lot of people can relate to, is we learn by teaching as well, or by expressing whatever ideas we have. It doesn't have to be teaching, but so we learn by talking about things. And the reason this helps people change is because, I think, my personal opinion is, the strategy that always works is that once people have been totally heard and had their ideas expressed out fully, then you can show them how they can achieve whatever it is that they're aiming at, but in a way that it doesn't also lead to the issues that their ideas lead to at the moment. And that's, so it's almost like you almost want to support them in what their idea is, but you want to kind of sort of nudge them, or not just nudge them, you're not trying to manipulate, but more like try to show them how they can achieve the same thing without having to have the issues. But the first thing you have to do is you have to listen to them. And so I think one effect of Estuary in general is that people are just listened to. And they have to like make their arguments make sense, because otherwise the group will just lose interest if nothing else. It's not even, it's the subtle things like that, I think.
I think all that's good. It, Estuary grew mostly out of a pastoral space, because in some ways it grew out of the randos, which is a pastoral space. It's a space of listening. One of the things that you learn, hopefully fairly quickly in ministry, was that exactly what you just said. You're probably not going to change people. Your arguments likely aren't going to impact people immediately, and even if they do, they won't admit it. And often the best way is to be a good listener, ask helpful questions, and let people discover what people usually change along the lines of what they feel that they have discovered themselves. And Estuary provides a place where people are heard, they can do some probing, some discovery, and when they leave a meeting saying, I learned this, then they actually take something away. That's a lot better than me saying, here, take this. It doesn't work so well.
Well, actually on that, so given it grew out of a pastoral space, Cassidy, I'm curious what you think about this, because we've floated the idea before of can that same spirit be brought to other types of conversations, like really polemical, political disagreements, which is more the sort of, in the legal work I do, that's what I come across the most. And very often I'm, as I said, defending people who have engaged in debate, like formal debate. I have never gone to a debate and actually changed my mind personally. Maybe other people have. So yeah, what do you think of its potential for that, or do you think it actually is best suited in this kind of more meaning-centered pastoral kind of frame?
I don't know. I think Estuary is very powerful, and I think that it could create change in these different spaces. The thing is, it really hasn't been tested yet, not in the fullness of that. And so how it will change, what it will change, I don't know. The problem with religious or political spaces is that they've often become very religious now. And yeah, if you enter that space without that sort of willingness and curiosity, that can create a lot of tensions. But I don't know. I do think that, like I've said, it works better than anything else that I've seen trying to get different ideas out. How it will all work, I don't know, but I'm really interested to see how it would.
Elizabeth Oldfield was here in the morning. You know, she had written this thing called Friendship is My Theory of Change. That was, I think, the title of the article, where she goes through these different people who, and I think someone online says something like they're worried that sort of thing just leads to this kind of, like, I think they called it like the Anglican fudge, you know, like no one can have at the end of that any kind of strong convictions anymore. Which I'm sure can happen, but I think that tends to happen if people are actually afraid not to offend someone. But I think I actually am very fortunate to belong to multiple disparate groups, where I think people were truthful with me with the very strong beliefs that they have, but always done in this way that I don't feel personally attacked or anything like that. So for me, they can coexist. I'm trying to work out if it's really difficult to broaden that out. Yeah.
The thing about actually changing your mind, it's usually not the ideas. It's ideas coming out of people you trust or that are honest and truthful. And it's like you can't actually gain trust if you can't actually say what you believe and what you think and what you say, like you need to say. And yeah, where you have some of these safe spaces in more left-leaning circles, you can't always really say what you need to say. And there's a lot of thought policing, and it's the same on the conservative extreme as well. It's not one-sided politically, but there's some of that where Estuary's a little more messy, where it's sort of like the reality of trying to help people be able to learn how how to say what they really think in a way that is not so relationally disruptive. That's how I've always seen it. And so you have to start with the relationships if you want the ideas to make any lasting change. And you can't actually know if your ideas are worth any salt if they've never been challenged by someone who understands them and who might be able to see the world differently than you. That's just my opinion.
I mean, this to me makes a lot of sense because in some sense, every time you try to put good ideas in practice, it always ends up looking like you are trying to achieve a certain purpose with certain people.
Well, and that's why I've been so passionate about seeing it be planted in lived context, because Estuary very much started online and it grew a lot because of COVID. But when you have these estuaries in lived communities, all of a sudden it's not just sitting around being armchair experts, like thinking about ideas. You finish the session and you have a meal, or on the weekends you can help the guy fix their bike or what have you. And all of a sudden there's these other types of participations that come out that make us more human and create higher trust. And it's very difficult to do that behind screens, particularly with large amounts of distances between the people you're talking to. Okay. Any more questions from anybody? Yeah.
Hi. Yes, indeed. I probably don't need it, as just pointing out. So my question is actually probably most to Cassidy, really, which was, you were talking about the advantages and disadvantages of these different venues, like pubs and churches and community centres, and I'd be interested in that. And another thing is, how do you deal with terminology? Because, it might be pronouns, it might be who's a clergyman. If it's political, it might be what's a communist or fascist. How do you deal with differences over terminology in this kind of thing?
Paul, do you mind starting so that I can get the camera back, and then I'll come in and answer as well?
Most people start wherever you can. Take your bet. I would, if you could get a church space, prioritize if you can get it reliably, if you can get it at no cost, if there's a degree of quiet and facilitation. Go with those things. And most people won't have options. I have options because I'm a pastor of a church. I have the keys. I can just unlock it. It's easy for me. But I think one of the answers is just start. If you want to do this, just start. And then very quickly, your limits will emerge. And then talk to the group. And the group will show you what's working best, because if you meet here, 10 people show up, and if you meet there, only 3 people could show up, and they can't hear each other. So just start working the problem. And I think the same is true of terminology. As the group forms, and as, again, the more reps you can get, and by reps I mean my group meets every week. If you have a group that meets every week, you will meet 52 times a year. If you have a group that meets once a month, you will meet 12 times a year. A group that meets 52 times a year versus 12 times a year will grow faster, will grow tighter, trust will develop. The more often you can meet, the more the group will bond, and issues like terminology, you'll figure it out. People will let you know if you say something that they don't like, eventually. But I would say just start with it. And again, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the spirit of it. It's a people first before ideas. Everybody comes. I had recently had somebody say, I want to do a rando. I said, okay, but I don't want to talk about myself. So I said, in other words, you have a whole bunch of theoretical ideas that you want to bring to my channel to blow out onto the internet. You don't need me for that. Yeah, but you already have people who will listen. Well, great. Now what does that make me? The point of all of this is to encourage a high trust context where people can come and be themselves, and that then will lead to the productivity. And all the other issues are pointed towards that goal. And if you keep that goal in mind, the other things will take care of themselves.
Yeah, and so some are just the practical pros and cons that I've seen. Pubs, cafes, they're freely available. They're certain hours. You can have some sort of predictability, but there's not as much privacy potentially, and they can get loud. So if you're small, it's usually a good place to start. Houses are interesting because most people have a house or some space, and if you have enough, there might be someone who will be willing to let people in their house. The problem is houses are not neutral. Like, they're lived spaces, they have ownership, and so there's always sort of a weird power dynamic. And so I think that if you're going to do it in someone's house, you should have someone else generally be leading the estuary protocol, just to kind of give some sort of separation from the house and then the group and the dynamics. And then communities and churches, which I do think are sort of the two most ideal options, are kind of those nice places because there's usually places for people to meet and engage. They're built for those spaces. You can generally get them for not so much money, and they can act as more neutral spaces, especially if you're coming with that group. And you're the pastor's not necessarily the leader, but that can also work as well, as long as you're like have that commitment to say this is the space. There's no altar calls. There's nothing. So those are kind of the pros or the cons. But yeah, I agree that you kind of have to grow with where you're at and just realize there's going to be trade-offs with whatever you choose. Just accept those and think together with the group what suits the group in your stage of growth and those places. And the beautiful thing is, we've been doing this for almost 10 years now. There are so many people who have tried things like Teo, but all across the US, in Europe, we have networks of people who have been doing this and are happy to give advice and let you know what they've learned, because they've been through it and made the mistakes. So there's also that.
Can I just say something about the point on terminology? This is like 2 examples. This is the approach I take. I have no idea if it's the most useful one or not. I tend to just try to work out what someone is saying, and therefore I tend to just try to figure out what they mean by the terms they use and then translate. So I'll give you an example in the political space. So someone in a group I'm in referred to me as like, I think they refer to me as something like very right wing. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. Can you tell me what you mean by right wing? And then because I don't see myself that way, but that's not what I didn't kind of talk about me. I just asked, can you tell me what your definition is? And then I just kept using it and said, okay, by your definition, this is this. By my definition, this is what I mean. And what I've heard, I swear I learned so much from Elizabeth Oldfield, because what I've heard her say over and over again, quoting someone else, is clarity is kindness. And I just try to be very clear about what I mean and what I'm going to use, and what I ask people just to tell me what it is that they mean. And at some point we can get to, like a shared agreement, and I've done that both on one-on-one and in a group basis. In another group I'm in, not an estuary, the issue of pronouns did come up, and again I handled it in a very similar way. So this person wanted to, tell me their pronouns, so I said, that's fine, you're more than welcome to do so. I'm not going to give mine, and I'm not going to insist everyone else does, but you're very welcome to give yours. I can't promise everyone will use them, and we can talk about why if you want. So again, I try, and it doesn't always work. I try to understand what that person means by the terms, and then if it's something that I think I'm coming from a different perspective on, I try to say, this is what I'm going to do. Sometimes for the sake of conversation, to avoid arguing about it, I just use their definitions, but I let them know that I'm using your definition. This is what I mean. We can translate at the end.
Any other questions?
Hi. This is like in some ways related to like the previous question, but what do you sort of do when somebody wants to come into a space, but they are worried because of experiences they've had with people who disagree with them on certain points? So things like gender, sexuality, for me, like those two, and disability stuff is obviously at the front of my mind because I deal with those. How do you then sort of come into a space and make sure that it feels safe for those people who are looking to interact with people who disagree with them, but also have that fear of safety. Like, will I be safe in this space? Will this be a space where I can interact with people who disagree with me and we can still recognize each other's humanity? How do you sort of deal with that? Not necessarily the actual how to make it safe, but more making sure that people know that it will be safe for them to come into this space and interact with people who they know disagree with them. If that makes sense. That was quite meandering.
I don't know that you can guarantee what other people experience. You just can't. You can, I think, practice hospitality, and I think you can, again, demonstrate that the primary thing here are the people. That's primary. Now, people will attach various things to them and make them sacred. There are too many things that people do that with. And if one person leaves your group because they have a complaint, you can't stop that from happening. You can just try and be as hospitable as you can. And again, partly what tends to happen is that because of the way the protocol is set up, the group will intuitively have a sense of they're going to vote for what they want. And if the group feels tension over certain things, they'll usually avoid it. Now, if someone comes in with an issue and says, this group has to be about my issue, they should probably find a group that is about that issue somewhere else. It's supposed to be an open space. I don't know. I mean, that whole word safety is difficult because as a culture we have, people need to be confronted. Well, that's not safe. So you just...
I'm more like referring to like when people have had genuine instances of unsafety, either because they've been like harassed in public or assaulted, or that sort of genuine like physical safety concerns, and they're like, I want to engage with this space, and at the same time this prior experience is making me very wary of it.
Can I answer that again from a different context? Again, I don't have that much experience building Estuary so far, but I do with the apostasy, which was a very live issue for us. Actually, like Paul said, I actually learned very early on that I don't think it's kind for me to be able to promise people safety because I can't do it. I want to do it, but I can't. And I never want to tell someone, you definitely will be safe, and then abandon that promise. What I try and do is if someone expresses that concern, I try to meet with them one-on-one. I try to figure out what is their concern. I can promise that I will try to do these things to make you feel safe. Come and try it. Let me know how it goes. I won't know and you won't know until you try it. And it depends on what it is. So if it's something like physical safety, there are some security measures that we can take. Again, I can't guarantee they're going to work. I always tell people, as much as I wish this wasn't true, some of the worst terrorist attacks in the country have happened after people have gone through security. So I cannot guarantee it, but these are the measures that I can put in place. And then it's completely up to you if you want to take that risk or not. But I do acknowledge it is a risk. And then if it's about something like, so if it's disability, then I can always say, well, okay, we can try and find a venue that has this access or not. So these are like more physical things that I think I have more ability to say in advance what I can do and what I can't do. If it's something about sexuality, what I can say is, I can't guarantee, but the group is very committed to treating you like a human being and like a person, so not kind of personally treating you differently in any way. But I cannot guarantee that they'll have the same opinion as you about this thing that you find sacred to yourself. And again, it is up to you if you want to engage with that or not. So again, I try my best to be really clear. Sometimes that works well. When it hasn't, I try to meet people for coffee afterwards, see how it is. And sometimes it's something I couldn't have done anything about. Sometimes actually they're so vulnerable that maybe they need to take that time out and come back at a different time in their life, which does happen. And sometimes it's just that they need to actually find a support group for the thing that it is that they're worried about. I don't know in advance which of those is going to be, but I just try to be really clear up front what it is that like we can do as a group.
Okay, yeah.
I just wanted to get back to the problem of disagreement. I found that people are really afraid of disagreement. So much so, their experience has been, like my son's experience, his friends will have deserted him because they disagree. I'm very different. I'm friends with people that I disagree with. But people come up to me and say, how can you be friends with that person? You don't agree with him. And I just say, well, look, people are more important. Friendship is more important than politics. But people don't get that. So I'm wondering, is there a way to model productive disagreement, to show people how it can be done, that it can be done?
I think you said it well, you embody it. Some people say this is more of a brave space than a safe space. And I have this all the time online. And people will disagree with me all the time, and they will let me know. And once they learn that they can say to me that I'm full of it, or I'm wrong, or I'm evil, and they see I'm not bothered by that, they have an opinion. So what? Everyone has opinions. It's okay. We can talk about our opinions. The differences of opinions can make for very interesting conversation. So I think part of what I wanted for Estuary was a place in which this was practiced. And so one of the guys in my weekly Estuary, he goes to lots of groups. And the other group that he often goes to is a political group. And he goes to all these groups and he comes back with these horror stories, exactly what you said. And he says, but I go to this group and we can talk about anything. And because of how my church is and where I live, my group is astoundingly diverse of opinions, of sexuality, of race. It's enormously diverse, but we're comfortable with each other. We like each other. And a big part of it is if you can, I really agree with Tayo, if you can sort of grow your group slowly, once you have trust, I think trust is the main thing. If you can establish a culture of trust, a context of trust, people feel it when they come in the room. And that's again why I said, you know a group is going well when people get personal. We have sometimes people will come in and they will tell things to the group. They will say, I can't tell my family this, but they will tell this group this. And that's how you know. Now, the group has all kinds of opinions, but so what? The person with their set of problems is going to have to figure out what to do. You can give them advice. That usually doesn't help at all because they won't follow it. You can, and hopefully if you establish in the group a culture of generosity, of hospitality, because if someone has a problem, they're looking for different ideas because the ideas that they brought to the problem have not solved it. So again, so much of it is a culture, and the best way to practice it is to embody it. Go ahead and be angry with me. Go ahead and yell at me. Go ahead and do those things against me. You know what's powerful? Forgiveness. And if you practice forgiveness, people will learn, I can say and do things, and you know what? They might forgive me and take me back in. And once that has happened a couple of times, you can have a brave space and a strong space where you can actually deal with things instead of people being so reactive. The problem with the reactive person is they are a prisoner of their allergies. And it's incredibly isolating and incredibly lonely. You don't want to live like that. So it means you're going to have to be a little bit brave, but if you can find trustworthy people, wow, all kinds of things can happen.
And I think actions speak a lot louder than words with this stuff. Like when I worked in comedy, everybody knew who I was. I would leave comedy events to go to midnight liturgies, and so they knew who I was. They knew what I stood for. They knew I didn't smoke, I didn't drink. Yet I sat there with them, and I didn't. I was friends with them, even though we all knew we disagreed on some of the most fundamental questions. And that built trust to realize, hey, we can agree and we can still see each other as humans, and that's so powerful. And so just living life with people who you disagree with, being willing to still sit with them at a bar and share a meal, I think that's how you show that it's okay to disagree.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's always show, don't tell. But just to add to that, because you said that it sounds like this is something you already kind of do, but other people are asking, how can you do it? So I think we can all do it in our personal lives, but part of what we're trying to do with Estuary is to model it publicly for other people so they can see it. So, we're just, we haven't kind of done that on as big a scale as like they've done in America with Midwestuary, but I think they had some like live disagreements on the stage. And I know that like Elizabeth Oldfield's channel, this is literally what she says she does, like talks to people who fundamentally disagrees with her, so people can see that modeled and they can experience it themselves as a listener, because I've had that experience when I see someone I really disagree with on, not just that, there's another one called the Enemies Project where you have people from completely different sides talking to each other, and I start getting that spike, and it's for me to practice listening, it's for other people to see how it's done. So I think these are all things that we can do in our personal lives with Estuary, and that's really good. I think what we're trying to think about doing is like, is there a way, or in a better way, to kind of model that as well? And sometimes we're going to get that wrong. It might not be the right conversation, or and it's an open question of whether it's something we can actually kind of show to a culture more publicly. We'll see.
All right. I think we should land the plane. So thank you all for